Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me here. This is a scene from a movie called The Matrix, and how many people here have seen the movie The Matrix?
No.
Okay. You know, like The Lord of the Rings we were talking earlier, this is a movie that came out in 1999 as science fiction, and you have to accept that. But there are a whole lot of themes that were coming into there, and one of them is, here you have a guy telling this computer technology kid that if he takes the red pill, he could take the red pill or the blue pill. If he takes the blue pill, he'll fall asleep and go back to his world. And he'll never have any memory of it. But if he takes the red pill, he will see what the world looks like, and he will never, ever not see it any other way. Well, he takes the red pill, and then he realizes, once he takes the red pill that the world has been enslaved. And in this movie, the science fiction movie, it's through a high technology and artificial intelligence. But when you go through the movie, you find that it is itself kind of a harbinger of what's happened. But he takes the blue pill. So what would happen is I would be briefing in the Pentagon or the agencies and the special operations group, like the SEALs or the Delta Force people, and I would give them the brief, and maybe about a month or two later, people would start being fired. You know, they would start to see what was going on, and I'll stay vague about that. But and they called my briefings the Red Pill Brief, and they were very famous in Washington D.C. So famous that the Muslim Brotherhood made it their point to get me pushed out, and I was pushed out. So what happened is a woman, Christine Brim, came up to me. She worked for the Center for Security Policy. She said, "Steve, these briefings are the only thing that have gotten people to look the other way and see what's happening. And one day someone's going to kill you." She really said that. And she said, "What we really need you to do is take your briefings and make them into a book." And so it took a while to do it. The first thing they did was they took a recording and they typed it down. They said, "Steve, you're saying so much stuff here. You have to have footnotes for it." And we don't know how to do it because they wanted me to do a presentation. They recorded and turned it into a book, and that was my contribution. So then they come back and say, "And we don't know where you got these sources. Can you do that?" Well, that took 2 years because, of course, I'm working full time. The long and short of it is, this book came out, and it reflects my briefings, and it has been banned by the White House. And I'm not trying to. This is a book that is hard in English if you're native speaking English, so I'm not going to be hurt by any feelings if people say I'll pass on it. But I just want to show you what the book tries to do from the perspective of somebody who's worked this issue in detail. Is I just want to tell you how I did it. The organizing principle, that's a quote from Barack Obama when he basically said the one organizing principle in the Muslim world is Sharia. And so I raised the question, if we all agree that Sharia is the one organizing principle in the Muslim world, how can you criminalize us knowing it? Because if we can't know the organizing principle, we can't know anything. And then I basically talk about what the red pill is. I talk about what's called the Islamic movement. This is the Muslim Brotherhood, and about the Muslim Brotherhood's deep penetration into Western establishments. So much so that me and a friend of mine, we created a 501, a NGO, which is going to stand up in about a month. We can argue that almost every decision that the United States made in the war on terror, the Brotherhood had a strong influence in. That's how powerful they are. And here's the thing. You can't get half the people in the United States to even acknowledge that the Brotherhood exists in America. And they're there. They write articles. They say who they are. There's court cases where their information is entered into evidence. And then I introduce another group called the OIC. Who here has ever heard of the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation? I could brief at national security levels in the United States and find that nobody has ever heard of this organization. But this is an organization that represents every Islamic country at the head of state level, all 57 member states, where they make treaties, that they serve to the United Nations that have the force of law. And our national leaders do not even know this entity exists. So that, for example, in 1992, they served the United Nations something called the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam. Who here has not heard of that?
You have not heard.
Not heard of that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay, well, And please, if somebody, because I talk fast, people in English in America say, Steve, slow down. Please tell me to slow down. If there's something I said that's not making the jump, we have enough English-speaking, German-speaking people. I'm willing to step back and have it explained. I'm not here to bull rush anybody. But now think about this. You didn't know the OIC existed, yet in 1992 they served a legal instrument to the United Nations saying, when the Islamic world says human rights, they mean Sharia, and they mean nothing else but Sharia. So that when you go to the OSCE and you hear the Islamic entities talking about human rights, and you think they're talking about human rights from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they are not. They're talking about something completely different and recognized at the United Nations. So let me give you an example that I'm making up. This is not a real story, okay? So you go agree with an Islamic country that they can go into the Sudan to do peacekeeping and didn't realize that that gave them the mandate to implement Sharia, which would be to kill the non-Muslims. This is where the rubber meets the road. And when you go Google this, at a certain point you'll be shocked that this could be this public and nobody knows about it. And then you have to ask, how is it that at a cultural level, critical information, which is plainly available, is completely concealed, in plain sight? In 1999, the same OIC created something called the International Convention on Countering Terrorism. And the first two articles, then they served to the United Nations. The first two articles, back to back, say, we define terrorism according to Sharia law. Well, that means that you can't read the rest of the stuff that would read like anybody's condemning terrorism. But guess what Islamic law does not consider terrorism? Jihad.
Killing Christians and Jews.
Jihad.
Yeah.
Okay? So you will always hear them say, we condemn all forms of terrorism, and every third or fourth time you'll hear them say, according to Sharia.
Yeah.
So, but does it matter that we have diplomatic corps that do not know this when they're negotiating? So let me give you another one, and I'll bring it home. In 2005, in December 2005, the OIC met at the head of state level, and they came up with something called the 10-year program of action. And the 10-year program of action was to impose Islamic speech codes on the world through the United Nations. Okay? They adopted a term that was put into motion by an organization in America called, I'll get back to you, called the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Right there. Okay, the Triple IT, a Muslim Brotherhood group. They are the ones who coined the phrase Islamophobia in the late 1980s, where they said, here's the thinking, the left is so successful on racism, sexism, homophobia, that if we put Islamophobia right after that, we can get the left to implement half of our program as part of their program with them never understanding. So there's a little sidebar. You can't understand the attack pattern of the Islamic and the Brotherhood, the OIC and the Brotherhood, if you don't understand it's grafted on top of a multicultural narrative, which at a certain point they'll just cast aside if they win and if the left wins at that. So what I'm trying to point out here is, in 2005, they passed a resolution at the head of state level. Every head of state of the Islamic world was good with this, saying that they wanted to convert the speech codes of America to what? To Islamic speech code standards. And guess what? I'm cutting it short here, but Islamic speech law says that you can't say anything about Islam that Islam does not permit you to say, even if it's correct. Even if it's correct.
And true.
So when you go to the OSCE last Thursday night, and you had the left saying on record that you could say something known to be true and that would qualify as hate speech, you would know that that is completely alien to Western concepts of free speech, that our diplomatic world is all on board with, that is completely in line with Islamic speech standards. So I want to bring that current because this is the 10th year of the 10-year program of action. In the first week of the first month of the 10-year plan, Charlie Hebdo. Then you had Copenhagen. Then you had a third thing, which I can't remember. You had the attempted killing in Garland, Texas. This is the year they plan to execute that. And you're going to see series of events that are going to get you to be called strange for standing up for free speech rights, that your own leaders and media are going to say you are a hater because you're advocating hate. And while we believe in free speech, we don't believe in hate, and that's illegal. And the reason they'll do that is because there'll be acts of terrorism.
A question, was Fort Hood part of their program?
Fort Hood? No. But let me say this. In January 2000, and I don't want to spend too much time because we're going to go to the interfaith part of this. In January 2005, excuse me, in December 2005, you had the OIC declare, okay, that the 10-year plan. In January of 2006, I was warning Central Command, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and OSD and other people, you need to watch what's going on over in Europe with this cartoon crisis. This is big. Get out of here. We got a war to fight. So in March, they asked me to come and say, Steve, could you please explain to us how you saw this coming? Because we didn't see it. I said, yes, you did, because I sent you this stuff. Yeah, but we didn't see it. And guess what? They never, ever see it.
But why are they so blind? Why are they so blind?
Well, let's put that off to questions and answers at the end.
Okay,
but let me just say, you then had the cartoon crisis. Later that year, you had Pope Benedict and his Regensburg speech. Then you had the trial of the attempted trial of Geert Wilders. Then you had the Quran burning minister in Florida. Now, what you need to know is they had riots because he said he was going to do it, and he decided not to do it. But they still had riots. But more important, and this is important for your question, and we'll put off questions till after the end for this, just because I think it's important to understand, we're blind to something which is a freight train coming right down the middle of the highway. And you know, one of my briefings, I basically say, we are living in a time where Obi-Wan could say, these aren't the droids you're looking for, move on. That people will just say, just like we saw at the conference, this is not real. We could just not look at that. And you watch everybody look a different way. But what you had is, what's really important about the OIC, the 10-year program of action, is then, after they had the riots with the minister who did burn a Quran, then about 3 months later, you find in Mazar-e-Sharif, which is a backwater of Afghanistan, 90% illiteracy, 99% does not speak English, right? Okay, and all of a sudden there are these massive riots because it turned out that a minister then did burn a Quran in Florida. But here's the thing. The only time it hit the news that the minister burned a Quran in Florida in the United States was when they saw the riots there. It was never reported in America because who cares? But what it means is that event full of all these English language placards, that event was completely stage managed. Completely stage managed. The only people killed were, guess what? UN employees. Only people killed. But the point of it is, you had these riots in Mazar-e-Sharif that were extremely violent, and they had Central Command literally go, whoa, what's going on here? And the goal was for them to turn around and say, listen, Minister, you're exercising your First Amendment right inside the United States is getting in the way of us fighting our war here. And so, did that activity help or hurt for the OIC? It already got our leaders to understand their success in terms of satisfying their narrative against U.S. citizens. Then you had a situation where a sergeant in the U.S. Army was asked by an imam in a jail, the Bagram jail, to burn Qurans because they were spreading messages about it. This is not under, nobody argues this. This is not, these are stipulated, that's a stipulated fact. Okay, So at the direction of the imam, they go and burn Qurans. And in Islamic law, it says the proper destruction of a Quran is through burning. There are massive riots. Karzai, not the Taliban, okay? The OIC, not Al-Qaeda, demand that he be punished, and be punished severely, and there's riots. And nobody can understand this huge violent upswing. The command, the central command, MNFI or ISAF, International Security Force Afghanistan, they're totally shocked at this huge uprising. They don't know what to do about it. But the interesting thing is Karzai then brought in the Taliban to negotiate with each other about what the proper punishment should be for the soldier. They conceded in their own discussion that they knew he had no intention to do wrong, demanding his punishment. You had the U.S. Army review his activities and say he violated no Uniform Code of Military Justice statute. So the side demanding punishment understood there was no intention. The side who was being asked to punish understood there was no violation of the law, and he was punished. Now that's pretty unprecedented. So the thing is as we see this 10-year program of action, they planned it this year, so you should expect to see very harsh actions where your action-reaction cycle should be how to respond to your media when they try to adopt that standard to shut you down. And this is where I get to a point where we're going to go into the briefing because I spent too much time here. But it's important to know the 10-year plan. And that it's really in there. It's really locked in solid. What did I want to say? It's really important to know. Well, I'll go on. But what I want to show you here is just going through it's just the table of contents. After we get to who the OIC is, I talk about what their program of action is. And then part 7, it's a 100-page chapter. It's called Catastrophic Failures. And the first thing I do is I show how there was catastrophic failure by our law enforcement inside the United States not to take action against people known to be dangerous, already identified as terrorists. For example, Anwar al-Awlaki, okay, was already identified as a Hamas and an Al-Qaeda terrorist when you read their notes and they say we stopped following him when he went into the Pentagon to brief our generals on multiculturalism. You read the FBI note after that very organization identified him as a terrorist. They said we stopped monitoring him when he went to the U.S. Capitol building to do the Friday prayers. And so you're saying, well, why was he allowed to go into the Pentagon? Why was he allowed? Because I was working in the Pentagon at that time, and I say, now I know why these generals were telling me I didn't have the big picture, if you know what I mean. But the point of it is, you get to Major Hassan, who shot those people at Fort Hood. They knew he was a bad guy and did not take action. You had the April 15th Boston Marathon bombing. Okay, the Russians gave U.S. law enforcement clear warning of how dangerous these people were, and now even at this thing in Garland, Texas, they had announced their decision to act. What you have is every major terrorist attack inside the United States since 9/11. There is knowledge that the people whose job it was to protect our public from this let this happen in the face of information they knew they had. The second part of that Chapter 7, Catastrophic Failures, is about how it has affected our ability to fight the war over there. Okay? And I maintain the position that we allowed ourselves to be influenced by Islamic narratives from the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, and through the OIC that ensured that every decision we made would fail. And fail at a critical point, according to someone else's estimation. And of course, Section 8 goes into the left-wing part of you have to understand the left-wing attack to understand how they're coming in through it. Because you can't understand what you're seeing at the OSCE unless you see that it's these statist diplomats who truly do not comprehend. Would you agree? They clearly have no comprehension of what's going on. When you're at a conference, where the theme is building bridges, and you don't know that building bridges is a major Muslim Brotherhood term that has a specific understood meaning, and you're talking about building bridges, you don't understand that narrative. If you don't understand the narrative you're talking throughout an entire international session, the European, the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that the entire narrative is a narrative established by the OIC. It's bad. What's worse, that they're following a narrative they don't know they're following, or that they would be following it and they did know? That's a philosophical question. But what I'd like to do is we'll go through this briefing, and what it has to do with is a certain part of it. Someone has to do this for me because I can't. It's a
different language.
Different escape. Okay. We just need to bring up the presentations. I said we can't go too far on questions because I went on a detour on the OIC. I think it's important because it'll give you understanding about why you'll see these what appear to be random attacks, and there's a reason they can be random but not random at the same time. So this is my brief. This is why I call it the red pill brief. What's going to happen is maybe about 9 months from now, I'm going to hire somebody, a good editor, and we're going to take this book. It's got 150 pages of footnotes. Because this is about making sure you understand this is not going to be proven wrong. It's not going to get into a tie with anything. This is what's happening. But what I'll do is I'll take this book and we'll shrink it down to a 200-page book without footnotes that people can read and get the understanding of it. And then if they want to go and back it up, they can go to a heavier book and get that. But to me, it's really important that a foundation be laid, that if people want to use something for a roadmap, they can look at that. They can do a little statistical fact checking to make it clear that there's nothing here that's even exaggerated. So what we have here is this briefing I was asked to give is in a specific form of what's going on, and this is called the interfaith delusion, is what I call it. Now, I'm going to jump the gun here, and I brought a couple books here. Well, I'll just use this book for now. This is called Interfaith Dialogue, a guide for Muslims, and it's written by Muhammad Shafiq and Muhammad Abu Nimr. And what's important to understand is they're very closely tied with the Muslim Brotherhood in America. So here you see, this book is put out by the International Institute of Islamic Thought, the IIIT, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? And so I started reading this, and I started kind of realizing that it says certain things that really surprised me, and I put a brief together to kind of address this, because if you're in America, you're saying, when Pope Benedict came over to the United States in 2008, he was giving speeches that attacked the OIC. But then the American bishops completely undermined him. So that when he went to some interfaith forum, every person that the American bishops had the Pope meet were all Brotherhood players. So what's going on here? And you'll find that's kind of a lot worse right now, because it seems like the current Pope is in that situation. This interfaith thing is about most of all major denominations. In America, we could basically show that every major denomination has joined into the interfaith movement, and that the Brotherhood has chosen the interfaith movement as a point of penetration.
Also the Jews?
Yep.
Jews also?
Some major denominations, yes. Yes. It would be true that not every Protestant or Catholic group has bought into this, where you could show certain key leadership elements have. Enough that you could show that there's total penetration within any group, if that makes sense. But the thing that this brief will do is it will try to show you that there is to understand how they can penetrate through the interfaith movement, you kind of have to know what the interfaith movement is. And I'll let Elizabeth give some detail, but here's somebody that I'm being told he's an unknown person in Austria and in Europe, and there's a reason why. He's an American, okay? But his name is Saul Alinsky. Who here has never heard of Saul Alinsky? And this is called the interfaith delusion, is what I call it. Now, I'm going to jump the gun here, and I brought a couple books here. Well, I'll just use this book for now. This is called Interfaith Dialogue, a guide for Muslims, and it's written by Muhammad Shafiq and Muhammad Abu Nimr. And what's important to understand is they're very closely tied with the Muslim Brotherhood in America. So here you see, this book is put out by the International Institute of Islamic Thought, the IIIT, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, okay? And so I started reading this, and I started kind of realizing that it says certain things that really surprised me, and I put a brief together to kind of address this, because if you're in America, you're saying, when Pope Benedict came over to the United States in 2008, he was giving speeches that attacked the OIC. But then the American bishops completely undermined him. So that when he went to some interfaith forum, every person that the American bishops had the Pope meet were all Brotherhood players. So what's going on here? And you'll find that it's kind of a lot worse right now, because it seems like the current Pope is in that situation. This interfaith thing is about most of all major denominations. In America, we could basically show that every major denomination has joined into the interfaith movement, and that the Brotherhood has chosen the interfaith movement as a point of penetration.
Also the Jews?
Yep.
Jews also.
Some major denominations, yes. Yes. It would be true that not every Protestant or Catholic group has bought into this, where you could show certain key leadership elements have. Enough that you could show that there's total penetration within any group, if that makes sense. But the thing that this brief will do is it will try to show you that there is to understand how they can penetrate through the interfaith movement, you kind of have to know what the interfaith movement is. And I'll let Elizabeth give some detail, but here's somebody that I'm being told he's an unknown person in Austria and in Europe, and there's a reason why. He's an American, okay? But his name is Saul Alinsky. Who here has never heard of Saul Alinsky? You've heard of him?
Well, Americans have. Europeans.
Okay, Saul Alinsky
No.
is a major left-wing player. You could say, are you familiar with something called the Frankfurt School?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you could say he was knee-deep in the Frankfurt School. You could say he is a cultural Marxist. But he is the cultural Marxist in America. So when you hear people talk about community organizing, that's code language for Alinskyism. When you hear the word dialogue come up, well, there's one sense in which people dialogue. But when you hear it come up in certain programs, dialogue starts to take on a specific programmatic meaning. And here's the thing. Hillary Clinton wrote her thesis on Saul Alinsky. And Barack Obama used to teach him. And so I would argue that from a European point of view, to understand the operating system of the left in America, you kind of have to get your hands on this and who those players are. And I'll let her read a little point here, because he did dedicate his book. He did make a dedication to his book, and I'll have her read it in German. But I'll do this.
I'll read it. I'll try to translate it. I'm not sure I can.
Oh, sure.
Read it in English.
You want me to read it in English? Well, lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical. From all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. So he dedicated his book to Lucifer.
So, I mean, if you want to take that as a dedication, what it means that the left would rather be ruler in hell than subject in heaven. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. But I think there are certain key trends that come out of this book that define the left wing in America. And because I'm talking about interfaith from that perspective, it'd be good to just kind of tee that in. I personally have no doubt that Soros is a major player in American politics through Alinskyism. And there's a couple key points to Alinskyism. One is it's to reduce all thinking to meaninglessness. Okay? And I'll give an explanation here. The second thing is to take tried, I'll say, sacred terms in the public space, in the religious space, take iconic terms and redefine them and use them for a different purpose. Okay? You see that that's happened in the religious community. You see this has happened in the political sphere. So it's important to understand, because I think I have a slide where I basically say there's real information. In the United States, there's a very left-wing organization called the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. If you go after a Brotherhood front group called CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, and you don't realize you're going to be attacked by the ACLU, you're not getting it. You know, and what I mean by that is, it's always, you could be attacking on two fronts. If you attack on one front, you have to block on another front. But if you're going to go after one, you really realize you have to have the other one accounted for. And the other thing I basically try to get people to understand is, you not only have to make your statement, you have to anticipate how they're going to respond, and you already have to have answered their response and go. Here's a couple quotes we have from 2012. This is right after the video, the YouTube clip, in which there's really good evidence that this was a managed event. Do you remember talking about the YouTube clip of Muhammad that caused all these actions? Well, there's really compelling evidence that this was something that was started and planned out as an event, just like the decision to go after Pope Benedict, the decision to have the cartoon crisis, where you saw all these, not just radical groups, but state actors get involved in it. So how do you understand that the President of the United States said this to the United Nations in 2012? So if you're an American like me, you kind of want to understand where things are going. But let me say this. 2 nights ago, we had the OSCE say the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay? The same thing. And so what I would like to say is the fix is in. Okay? And we have to understand that.
Explain that, please.
The fix is in. The fix is in, meaning this is something of a fait accompli. And what has to happen is you have to work against the current to undo this. Because what you're seeing, we were commenting on the lack of intellectual rigor at the OSCE because they no longer have to think to implement. Now they're just executing. They're just in implementation mode. So I just say it's behind the power tree. What I'd like to point out is, I've given this brief for a while, and here's just a quote about who I am. While all 4 of us were in senior U.S. intelligence community positions and should have known the information I briefed, we were not. And this was signed by the former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, that was General Boykin, the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, that was Joseph Schmitz, the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, that was General Soyster, and the head of the CIA. They all said before we briefed them on this, they never knew this. So we have a good track record of being able to come into people who think they know and don't. So what I'd like to do is page through a couple of books on Islam that I think you might find interesting. This is War and Peace in the Law of Islam, written by Majid Kadari. He wrote this in the late 60s. He did it when in America. He, I do believe, is an Iraqi Christian. Okay? And this book called The Quranic Concept of War, written by a brigadier general of the Pakistani army named S.K. Malik. He wrote it when he was a brigadier general on the Chief of Staff office. And it was forwarded by the Chief of Staff of the Pakistani army, General Zia al-Haq. For those who may not be aware, Zia al-Haq became the head of Pakistan. And I'd just like to point out that in an Islamic country, where a general writes a book approved by the Chief of Staff of the army called The Quranic Concept of War, he would not have been allowed to have this title had the book not explained the Quranic concept of war. Does that make sense? The fact that he's able to have that title demonstrates that it is in fact accepted, because it would be a violation of Islamic law. Now this is where we might want some translations, but what do they say in this book? It follows that the existence of the Dar al-Harb, the world of war, the world of the enemy. If I were here, if we were in the States, or if I was doing a day-long brief, I'd bring a book. I'd have someone look up in a book of Islamic law. I'd bring 3 books. You look up the word Harbi, enemy person from the territory of war. It follows that the existence of the Dar al-Harb is ultimately outlawed under the Islamic Jural Order under Islamic law, that the Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam and peace, is permanently under jihad obligation until the Dar al-Harb is reduced to non-existence, and that any community accepting certain disabilities must submit to Islamic rule and reside in the Dar al-Islam or be bound as clients to the Muslim community. The universality of Islam and all of its embracing creed is imposed on the believers as a continuous process of warfare, psychological and political, if not strictly military.
Braucht
What
jemand
is
eine
being said here?
Übersetzung? Braucht jemand eine Übersetzung?
Nein.
Nein, geht? Geht.
Good? I'll go like this. Good? Because what is being said here? The concept of Islamic warfare is perpetual. They may be time limited on when they can or can't fight the kinetic battle, the shooting battle, but they are always under obligation to fight the political and
It's the state of
psychological
mind.
war.
It's the state of mind.
Yes. And so you could say, Steve, I disagree with that. I say, I find, Steve, I have a friend who's Muslim. He doesn't think that way. I say, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. But you need to have an understanding that at the official level, and the groups we're looking at, they absolutely think this, and as a practical matter, they are correct. Okay? Because what I find has happened is people decide, instead of knowing the facts of the matter, they take what is considered hearsay and what their friend tells them. And that's okay if you're with your friend at the bar or at the coffee house if he's Muslim. But at a certain point, if you're making decisions, you have a duty to be competent, that is the duty to know. Like I told them to their face. You don't get to make a decision about what Islam is because a country representing, a diplomat representing a foreign country tells you what it is. You have a duty representing your country to know what they mean when they say it. So you know if they're lying. Okay? Or just having a different understanding of the same thing. So here you have it. I want to prepare you for a concept. In Western concepts of warfare, and certainly in the U.S. concept of warfare, warfare is about bringing force to bear and crushing people.
Yeah.
So you could say that we have the Arnold Schwarzenegger body with the, average size head. I'll say, they don't believe in being robust. They believe the Islamic concept of warfare is one that is fought in the preparation stage. The main battle is fought in preparation. And it's really important because I want you to keep your eye. By the time they've done the political and psychological, when they strike, they expect you to collapse. Just like Spain. See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That's the concept. So the main effort in Islamic warfare is what they call the preparation stage, the subversion stage. That's super important because it has a different frame of reference. And so what do we have here? Here's the general. So spirited, zealous, complete, and thorough should be our preparation for war, that we should enter upon the war of muscle, having already won the war of will. Only a strategy that aims at striking terror to the hearts of the enemies from the preparation stage can produce direct results and turn Lydell Hart's dream into a reality. Lydell Hart is a famous British military strategist. Okay? Let me say ding ding here. The Pakistanis, the Saudis, the Egyptians, they all go to the English and the US war colleges. Mm-hmm. They know our strategy like it was taught to them by us. Because it was. We have no concept of their strategy, even though they write it in English.
Yeah.
Okay? So, what we have here, I'm just going to read a couple things from the book. So, in all the situations referred to above, we see that whenever Almighty Allah wishes to frustrate and destroy the designs of His enemies, He does so by strengthening the hearts of the believers. But what should we do to impose our will and decision upon the enemy? To find answers to this question, let's take another probe into the book. What's the book? The Quran. How many people here think the Quran is an equivalent to the Bible? Raise your hand. No, I mean just a holds the place because
In
it's
general,
not.
maybe.
Huh?
In general, possible. I don't know.
Well, it's not, and it's important to understand. The Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, would be at the level of our Bible, the Christian or Jewish Bible, with one exception. The The hadith are the what's the word? Indirect divine revelation. Indirect divine revelation meaning a companion of the prophet heard him say, saw him say, or watched him do something, like the Gospels in the New Testament. Okay. The Quran is considered the uncreated Word of God. So its equivalent would be the Ten Commandments written by the finger of God into rock. Okay? So that something in the Quran, which is a command, is considered a command from God, and it can never be interpreted in the sense that we like to use the word interpreted to mean whatever you want it to mean. So when you're at the OSCE, like we were yesterday, and we saw the sociologists say, well, they just have to reinterpret their scriptures. Well, the problem is, if you're a Christian in the West, is we allow exactly those people to reinterpret Christian scriptures, and now nobody knows what it means anymore, if you think that's important. Okay, I just kind of want to point out. So, here is what he said is the Quranic concept of war. And I can get this book for people if they like. I am with you. Give firmness to the believers. I will instill terror into the hearts of the unbelievers. This is page 52 of the book. So, if it's in the Quran, who said it? Allah. Soon we will cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers. Okay, and those are the people of the book who aided them. Allah did cast them down from their strongholds and cast terror into their hearts, so that some he slew and some he made prisoners. And he made you heirs of their lands and their houses and their goods, of a land which you had not frequented before. And Allah has power over all things. So, if it's a land where they had not frequented before, is this defensive warfare? Or is this invasion? Okay? Now here's the thing. This verse from the Quran is known to be associated with the attack on a Jewish tribe called the Bani Qurayza. Okay? So, some you slew, all adult men, meaning any male with pubic hair. Some you made prisoners of, the women and the children. Is this not what ISIS is doing today?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are they quoting this? So what they did was they beheaded every male, sold the women and children into slavery. So we know that what this is associated with. And the final verse, and I think, let not the believers think they can get the better of the godly. They will never frustrate them. Here it is. I want you to look at this. Against them make ready your strength to the utmost of your power, including steeds of war to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah, and your enemies and others besides who you do not know, but whom Allah doth know. The U.S. 82nd Airborne has a saying, kill them all, let God sort them out. And I'm told it goes back to a medieval phrase. But the point is, doesn't this look like kill them all, let God sort them out? Oh, Islam doesn't stand for that. Okay. Now I want you to remember, against them make ready, because this quote starts with 856. This is where 860 begins. And to be truthful, I cut off part of it because I just wanted to fit it in here. So, the Quranic concept of war, over a 3-page period, gives 4 quotes from the Quran to say what the Quranic concept of war is. That the Pakistani military and the Pakistani Attorney General, Advocate General really, said is good. They called it a restatement of the law. Okay? The Indians pull this out of the pockets of people they fight in Kashmir. So, These are the 4 quotes that represent the Quranic concept of war. What is the Quranic concept of war?
Cast terror into the
Cast terror in the hearts of the unbelievers. Now, I'm not asking anybody to believe me. In fact, this is page 56 to 58, so it's really a 2-page period where this is done. I'm not asking you to believe I even wrote this right. You can get this book. It was written in English. Like everything they do is written in English. Okay? And you can read it. Because one of the things I do is I don't take the most extreme interpretation of anything, because I never have to do that. So we already know that the Pakistanis have been on this position since that book was written in 1978. So he goes on and he says, terror struck into the hearts of the enemies is not only a means, it is an end in itself. Once a condition of terror into the opponent's heart is obtained, hardly anything is left to be achieved. It is the point where the means and end meet and merge. Terror is not a means of imposing decision upon the enemy. It is the decision we wish to impose upon him. We don't only want to use terror to defeat you. We want you in a permanent state of terror. Okay?
Yeah, that's it.
This was not written by Al-Qaeda, remember. So let's take a look at a couple things here. This page right here. I'll try to get out of your way here. Terror cannot be struck in the hearts of an army by merely cutting its lines of communication or depriving it of its routes to withdraw. It is basically related to the strength or weakness of the human soul. The goal is to destroy faith. Faith in your God, faith in your world, faith in your leadership. Do you think most people who understood what was going on at the OSCE yesterday would lose faith in their leaders if they got an eye of it? They understood what was happening? It's a delegitimization campaign, if you want to use the language of insurgency. Psychological dislocation is temporary. Spiritual dislocation is permanent. To instill terror in the hearts of the enemy, it is essential in the ultimate analysis to dislocate his faith. An invincible faith is immune to terror. A weak faith offers inroads to terror. So, this is... This is what is euphemistically called spiritual warfare. At the top, the number one form of warfare, the one doctrinal basis of Islamic concept of jihad is spiritual warfare, to get you to be spiritually void. It makes sense that they would align with a political movement that would reduce everything you think to be meaningless. Does that not make sense? If you watch what the Brotherhood does with these groups, they never participate in the things that the left is doing, but they always push them to do it as allies. Because they want the left to reduce society to meaninglessness and hopelessness. What does anything mean? Okay? They come in and they establish order. So, people forget this. Back in the 80s, I was a Russian language qualified person and had a job in the government where I had to know Russian. Okay? And people forget this. When Lenin came in, okay, he had free love, he had open societies, easy divorce. People were naming their children Dynamo and stuff like that, an electric plant. When Stalin came around, people were so frozen because there was no order. What he did was he brought order. I will give you order, but you will follow me. And you know what the people said? Yes. But what did Lenin and the revolution do? It destroyed the old order. Okay? Hitler's kind of interesting because he took over with the brown shirts. They were kind of like Lenin. Okay? When I say genius, I don't mean this in any positive sense. I just mean that the man thought this through. He then had the Night of the Long Knives, where he brought in the establishment people, the black shirts, to actually run everything. He actually had his own revolution. He had a revolution as counter-revolution. I mean, you think about that. So, what you should think of is the Brotherhood and the OIC sees the left as the revolution, and they want to be the counter-revolution. It says, you want order, you want your daughter not to be pornified on the internet like you were when you were 18 years old and told that's normal. You want to have your daughter go to a bathroom and not have to worry about a transgender person being there? I'll tell you what, we'll give you that. We'll kill them. But you will follow us. And when that time comes, what you see today is all about destroying the current order to establish a new order. And co-opting the current leaders who are supposed to be something else into this because they're afraid to say no. And that's when they come in and they'll say, make sense?
Yeah.
This is the grand, what's hard is, what was really hard for me is I could do this, I could say, what's going on in Europe? Oh, sir, boom, 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 boom. What's going on? Boom, boom, boom. What's going on in America? You never look at it in your own country because you never expect it to happen in your own country. And I said, it was like, let me play a game. Let me analyze what's going on here like what's going on over there. Because I was like really good at what I did. When you have an enemy who understands that your population is spiritually vacant, and they're gonna get your people to crush that for them. Okay? They know what people will want. And the left will not be able to deliver on that. So, I forgot to read this. Whenever the form or type of strategy directed against the enemy, it must, in order to be effective, be capable of striking terror in the hearts of the enemy. This rule is fully applicable to nuclear as well as conventional war. So I want to make it clear, this is not an Al-Qaeda document. This is a Pakistani document. A nuclear power is already on record as saying they can justify nuclear weapons in a jihad.
Whoa.
That's true as a matter of fact. If you disagree, you're wrong. So here we have this document, and it's going to be my way of introducing the Brotherhood to you. I will tell you, this document was written in 1991 and captured in a raid of a Muslim Brotherhood archive in Virginia. Okay? But its precursor document was found in a raid in Lugano, Switzerland, called The Project, that was written in 1982. So everything you see here from this American case, you should assume there is an exact equivalent hitting the exact level here. Because you think that Germany is different than France, is different than America. From their perspective, it's just different flavors of the same thing, all of which is to be brought together, and what they would have is a coordinated understanding. So if there's a CAIR, C-A-I-R in America, it will take you all of a minute of research to find out who the exact equivalent is here. Okay.
Well, here we have the Islamische Glaubensgemeinschaft in Österreich.
So
That would be the equivalent of CARE.
okay, so here's a document. There was a man, his name was El Barassi. He was driving over the Chesapeake Bridge in Maryland, and his wife was taking pictures of the support structures. The police pulled her over. It turned out he had a material witness warrant against him, so they detained him. They had a material witness warrant on him because of his affiliations with the Brotherhood, already known. So they go to his home in Northern Virginia, I think it's Annandale, Virginia, and they find in his house a basement. That's no big thing, but in his basement they found a sub-basement. That's different. And they found the boxes and boxes of Muslim Brotherhood documents. This is one of those documents that was seized. And it was entered into evidence in something called the Holy Land Foundation case.
Can anybody translate the title of that? It says there.
Yes, it's called An Explanatory Memorandum on the General Strategic Goal of the Group in North America. Well, first of all, it was written in 1991 by a man named Akram, who at the time was the head of the Brotherhood, or a leader of the Brotherhood in North America. So, and because it was used as evidence. Go ahead. Just hit the space bar.
Oh, sorry.
So, did everybody read that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Next one?
Go ahead.
So
So, what does it say? The enablement of Islam in North America, meaning establishing an effective and stable Islamic movement. Capital I, capital M. It's important to know, and I don't know the German equivalent, but it's important to know the Islamic movement is the name of a movement. Al-Qaeda is part of it, the Brotherhood is part of it, the Taliban is part of it. If you see the word Islamic movement, it's not capitalized, it's because the translator didn't understand that it's the name of a movement. Okay, and we have books from the 1980s, like back then it was called the IMOA, the Islamic Movement of America, and they transitioned to different names. So, an Islamic movement led by the Muslim Brotherhood, which adopts Muslim causes domestically and globally, and establishing an effective and stable Islamic movement led by the Muslim Brotherhood. So what do we know? In the United States, the Muslim Brotherhood claims leadership over the Islamic movement. I do believe that because this came out of Lugano, Switzerland, you will find, you have other entities, and if you go to the UK, you find that the Pakistani groups, like Lashkar-e-Taiba and the stuff written by Maududi is at that level. But generally in the West, in the United States, the lead element is the Arab Muslim Brotherhood, and as a practical matter, the two organizations are in sync. So that the Islamic Society in North America, which is Arab and Muslim Brotherhood, merged with something called the Islamic Circle in North America, which was basically more of Maududi. Do you know what I mean by Maududi?
Yeah.
Okay, Maududi and the Pakistani Indian Deobandi equivalent. So, go ahead. So here we have the Brotherhood's logo. We're going to look at this. Okay, this little phrase here. See it? What's that say?
وأعدوا bereitet ihr für sie. Also das ist nur ein Codewort, geht zurück auf die eine Verse, also ein Vers im Koran, das sagt, bereitet für sie die größte Vieh, also Macht, um sie dann, ihnen eine Angst einzujagen. Furcht.
Bereitet ihnen die größte Furcht.
Genau.
Yeah, make them afraid, make them scared, make them afraid.
Das ist das Gelbe.
Das Gelbe unten, ja.
Against them, make ready. Can you say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bereitet ihnen die größte Furcht.
So, go ahead. I think I forgot to take a slide out of here. So, here we take a look at this. OBTW, oh, by the way. Let's go. Go ahead. That is this, right? Go ahead. Against them, make ready. Remember we quoted General Malik at 860, verse 860? Against them, make ready your strength, the utmost of your power. Go ahead. That's right out of the Quran. Against them, make ready your strength, the utmost of your power, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah and your enemies and others besides who you do not know, but who Allah doth know. So, what does the Brotherhood say they are? They're the Dawah. They are the Dawah entity. Now, people in America like Robert Spencer says stealth jihad. That's not a doctrinal term. They consider themselves the Dawah entity. Now, what is it? There are three, I hope I got this right, 3 duties of Islam. To know what is right, to know what is wrong, according to Islamic law, Dawah, and jihad. So wherever you have jihad, you must have dawah, and wherever you have dawah, it's supposed to lead to jihad. Jihad is the preparation stage. It is euphemistically translated for you to read as trying to get people to convert. What's the word for that? Proselytizing. They do proselytize in the dawah phase, but their real mission is to prepare by spreading the message to get things out. So, for example, they spent 10 years, the 10-year plan of action, to get you to understand we kill people who defame the Prophet. After the 10th year, they will say, you had notice, world, and now we have a right to kill you. And guess what? Although everybody on TV will say, we don't know what this is about, every Austrian, every American person, the average, they know exactly why that person gets killed. They know like their life depends on it. And that's when you get to the point where you realize your leaders are on a narrative that causes their public to lose confidence in them. There you have it, delegitimization. So we're going to get into this question of the interfaith dialogue. Everything I've said so far is just by way of entree to the interfaith dialogue, because you have to understand who the Brotherhood is to understand that when they write this book. And I did leave a couple verses out. I'll go to them afterwards to read to you what that document said about what their plan in America is. And it's a direct lift off of their plan from the Lugano, Switzerland document that was written in 1982. But this interfaith dialogue is about an attack on reason. In fact, the entire postmodern attack, politically correct, if you want to use the word political correctness, what I'm trying to get people to understand is political correctness is not random. It is the enforcement mechanism of a postmodern cultural Marxist narrative that seeks to redefine terms in a hostile way. So what I want to do is the assault on reason. And I give people, because I'm talking to people who haven't had any logic, so I want to take a basic concept of logic that in many logic classes they don't teach because it's so basic it doesn't need to be taught. And I feel a need to teach it to understand this is the point of attack. This is the point of attack. Not from the Brotherhood, but from the left. That in the 1980s, when the Brotherhood said we're going to use the word Islamophobia, and then the OIC adopted the word Islamophobia, okay, they had already assessed that this narrative was going to take down the West. Okay? So, and it's an assault on reason. Go ahead. So, Socrates, it is plain that the same thing won't be willing at the same time to do or suffer opposites with respect to the same part and in relation to the same thing. Okay? I just want to give quotes to tell you how classical this is. And let me make something very clear. This is the basis of Western thinking. If you go to China, one of the most destructive things that happened when China was being taken over by Europe and America, and they saw there was they got very addicted to drugs, right?
Yeah.
They also put in a new way of thinking, which was non-Chinese, Confucianism. So you don't have to be a Confucian. You don't have to be someone who believes in Confucianism in China to understand the thinking processes of China are based on that. You wipe that out, the Chinese have a hard time thinking. And what you see today is you see China reforming, not the least of which is they're returning to this Confucianism way of thinking. And as it becomes reintegrated, they become more self-assured. I'm trying to use this as a bad analogy to reason is the basis of Western thinking, going all the way back to the Greeks. Okay? Christianity integrated into that, because I'm coming from the philosophical point of view here, you could from a theological point come from a different point, reconciled itself with that. If you take reason out of Western thinking, the Western mind collapses. Okay? This is the basic attack. So Aristotle, it is impossible for the same attribute at once to belong and not belong to the same thing and in the same relation. Okay, Augustine, the truth is that which is. Aquinas, the same thing cannot be affirmed and denied at the same time. Go ahead. It's the principle of non-contradiction. It's really just a question of apples and oranges. So I want to set this up to talk about what apples and oranges is to go forward here. Go ahead. So, if you are an apple, you are an apple. That's the law of definition. If you are an apple, you are not an orange. That's the law of that's the law of the excluded middle. If you are an apple, you are not an apple. That's the law of non-contradiction. Make sense? Relativism, postmodernism, social Marxism is to say you could be a man and a woman. You could be Catholic and you can accept Islam philosophically. Okay? You can be someone who believes in what you believe and believe that another belief is every bit as valuable in your mind. But if you get yourself to say, I believe, the analogy I like to do is, let's just say I'm Catholic, you're Jewish, you're Muslim, you're Buddhist, you belong to a weird snake cult from Africa, and I don't know anything about it, but I know you're one of them. You're important in this discussion because you're the person I know nothing about when I say that what you think is every bit as important as what I say. Because you see, I could talk to a Jew, and a Jew we have a certain basis of agreement or disagreement. I could talk to a Muslim, and there's even a but when we finally get to him, so why am I saying this? The classic definition of tolerance, which has been redefined by the left, Alinskyism, the classic definition of tolerance is, I'm Catholic, you're Jewish, you're Muslim, you're Hindu, and you belong to some religion I know I don't know nothing about. The classic definition of tolerance is, I believe that you have a right to practice your religion, and you have a right to expect that I'll give you the right to practice your religion. But I don't have to accept what you believe, because in fact I don't believe. In fact, I don't believe. I'm only saying,
Neither appreciate.
and I don't have to appreciate it. I just, okay, the Alinskyist, the cultural Marxist redefinition of tolerance is this. You know, I believe what you believe is every bit as valuable as what I believe. And you see what happens there is you're negating your own belief. Because your belief is only as valuable as something you don't even know about. You think you're saying it to affirm him, but actually the goal is to deny you. Okay? See that, how that works? And the same thing works in the context of tolerating other societies. Well, of course, if you go to Spain, you should tolerate the Spaniards. But if you go to Spain and you're not a tourist, you want to live there, at some point you have to make a decision to become Spanish. Or get out. And more importantly, the Spanish have a right to say, hey, you're welcome. And if you want to stay, you could become a Spanish citizen. But you don't have a right to come and say, hey, I want to move in Spain, I want to have my laws in my country. You see, this is the attack. And please understand, this attack is being grafted on by the OIC. But it's one that's in the destruction of nationality. The destruction of your right to have an identity. Okay? It's an
We
attack
had
on
that
identity.
yesterday too, if you remember.
Absolutely.
That was complete destruction.
There was a lot of that.
Yes.
The tyranny of when apples equal. We're talking today. I made this because I first gave this to a group of conservative Catholics in America. And at the time, Pope Benedict used the phrase extreme relativism. Okay? And so, it's the tyranny of when apples equal oranges. And holding you and sending you to jail. Back in the time of Orwell in his book 1984, remember, it's being interrogated. 1 + 1 = 5. And you're not going out. You're not getting out of here until you say 1 + 1 = 5. That's this. That's what you're seeing being implemented. Go ahead. We're talking about the death of discernment, the total destruction of discernment. And what I want to do is I'm going to introduce something from my experience in Montgomery County, and I will challenge you. I already know it's true because I just went to the CIIC, the Abdulaziz Center here, and I was with Henrik here, and we realized we were talking to someone who had simply not the ability to discern what they were doing. They were Austrian citizens. And it would be no different if the same facility were in America, or if it were in Copenhagen. It's what has, if I talk to Americans who are like in their 40s or 50s, I say, do you ever notice how you raise your kids and they all hate you? And, yeah. What's that all about? And everybody kind of laughs. I said, well, what do you think happened in those schools that happened? Well, go ahead. So I want to use an example from Maryland, where I live. It's called, the interfaith group there is called Action in Montgomery County. Go ahead. And here it is. This is the interfaith movement group inside Montgomery County. Go ahead. And they say AIM's sister IAF affinities in Maryland. And you see, I think I have it blow up, but all the emails are IAF. Here's Voices Virginia, Voice IAF Virginia. You see how they all have IAF in their email? Now, I know you know what IAF is, because she already told you, but we'll get to it. Okay? So what is Industrial Areas Foundation? Go ahead.
Bingo.
Industrial Areas Foundation. Keep going. Here they are, IAF. We could go to go ahead. We could go to Wikipedia. Go ahead. It's a national community organizing network established by Saul Alinsky in 1940. So what do we know? We know that religious groups are oriented interfaith entity created by a man who is a cultural Marxist, whose book is dedicated to
Lucifer.
Lucifer. Now, if I go to a church group and brief this, I say, do you know, this is the point where we should end the brief because nothing more need be said. If you're in a church group and you actually have faith. But of course, we never stop there. Go ahead. So here we have a page here, and here are all the churches in Montgomery County that participate. And I gave this, and they're all, here you have a synagogue, here you have Seventh-day Adventists, here you have Anglicans, here you have Presbyterians. I don't know what these are, but they are. And of course, the Catholic Church is in there too. So here we have on AIM, what books do they want you to read? Keep going. IA's books that are recommended. Go ahead. Keep going. We just slide right through here. Rules for Radicals.
Rules for Radicals.
Go ahead.
It all comes back.
By church groups. There it is. And there it is. There's the dedication. Everybody, I make my slides like this because they're so controversial. I used to just key the stuff in and people said, you made that up. And I actually took the effort of having to photograph off the pages and then putting the pages in and I would lift those quotes because it's like, I will never have to prove, I will always prove that everything I say is in context. Because, it's out of context. So in the States, I literally bring, if I'm going to go brief a major government entity, I bring a suitcase full of books. So there it is right there. Go ahead. So we say, anyone who will not listen to my words, which the prophets speak in my name, I myself will hold accountable for it. I have not commanded or speak in the name of other gods, but the prophets shall die. So I kind of like this because it says, Elijah approached all the people and said, how long will you straddle the issue? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him. Now, I'm not saying groups like the Vatican are going to come out and say that they recognize Allah as God. But I will tell you, they severely flirt with that issue. Severely do. You're going to go to 1 Kings 18, verse 22. And all I'm saying is, there was a time when we understood that even though one religion believed in Baal, they understood that that was not God. By the way, there's nothing here I'm asking you to accept on an issue of faith. The whole point about creating apples and oranges is that this is not a theological discussion. This is an atheist should be able to approach. I brought up the Pope because we're at the CIIC the other day. And it's simply incredible what's happening there. So, in Deuteronomy 7, verses 6 to 8, for you are a people sacred to the Lord, your God. He has chosen you from all the nations on the face of the earth to be a people, particularly his own. Or, Quran verse 564, the Jews say, ... amongst them we have placed enmity and hatred till the day of judgment. So, here's the thing. Is this true or is this true? Or, for this conversation, is it an apple or is it an orange? You can believe in this, you can believe in this, you can believe in neither, but you cannot believe in both. So, in Exodus 19, verse 5 to 6, therefore, if you hearken to my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my special possession. Or, hadith narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, the prophet said, the hour of judgment will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews and kill them. It will not come until the Jews hide behind the rocks and trees. It will not come until the rocks and trees say, O Muslim, O servant of God, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him. So, do you know what's important about this hadith? First of all, it's it's from both Bukhari and Muslim, which means it's authoritative. I mean, I won't go through the whole explanation of that. Indirect divine revelation this is Article 7 of the Hamas Covenant. Okay. Article 2 of the Hamas Covenant says we are the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine.
So like to the left, they won't believe it.
All you have to do is bring up the document. It's publicly served.
Yeah.
But yes, you have to actually fight to get facts in.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So, go ahead. God's promise to Abraham: I will render you exceedingly fertile. I will make nations of you. Kings shall stem from you. I will maintain my covenant with you and your descendants after you throughout the ages as an everlasting pact. Go ahead. So, do you see? This is something short of everlasting. In fact, as it goes, Muslims don't enter paradise until they've killed all the Jews. You can believe that, or you can believe that, but you cannot believe both. Go ahead. So, for Jews and some Christians, from Genesis, again the Lord's messenger called on Abraham from heaven and said, I swear by myself, I will bless you abundantly and make you descendants as countless as the stars in the sky and sands on the seashores. Okay, what's important? In the Quran, Abraham is a Muslim prophet. In the Quran, Moses is a Muslim prophet. In the Quran, Jesus is a Muslim prophet. When you say, well, they don't understand, what I want to tell you is you don't understand. That in the Quran, they are Muslim prophets. Okay, and when you want to understand what they're saying, you must first understand where they're coming from. And one of the things, and it's in the Quran, Surah 9, it says that Christians and Jews changed their holy books to take out that they were told that Muhammad would come and then they should become Muslim. Okay? And that's divine revelation. So if you challenge that, you can be put to. Go ahead. So you cannot be an apple and a non-apple at the same time. Go ahead. So, oh my gosh, here's the Hamas Covenant, and there it is. Article 7.
More? Go ahead.
Go ahead. And these are all, that's Hamas, that's the Brotherhood, this CARE, ISNA, the Council of North America, MAS. Once you find that it's in a Muslim Brotherhood document, you have to understand that becomes part of the doctrine. And by the way, it's called the Hamas Covenant. Who do you make covenants with? God. Okay, go ahead. So when our diplomats say, well, you have to take that out of your covenant, you're really saying that they have to undo a covenant with God. So Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Job, Jonah, Aaron, they're all prophets. Go ahead. Christians believe Jesus to be the Son of God, one of three in a Trinity. But Islam holds them out to be Muslim prophets. Go ahead. We sent them these inspirations as we sent it to Noah and to the messenger after him. We sent inspiration to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, Jesus, Job, Jonah, Aaron, Solomon, blah, 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 and to Moses. What I'm just trying to point out here is they are identified by God as Muslim prophets. Go ahead. Can a Jew believe this and still be Jewish?
No.
Can a Christian?
No.
Go ahead. So, one God, three Abrahamic faiths. The same God doesn't even make it past Abraham. Doesn't survive Abraham. Go ahead.
I think the same Abraham.
Exactly.
Abraham.
So now we go into the Christian era. We have Matthew 28:18-20. All the power in heaven and earth has been given to me, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Or, Quran verse 5:72. Let me say this. Surah 5 is one of the last surahs chronologically in the Quran. Okay? I'm not getting into certain doctrines on how to understand the Quran, but one that has to be understood is the concept of abrogation. And that which was revealed later in the Quran controls or overrules something said earlier. Surah 5 is the last chapter or book of the Quran to speak about relations with non-Muslims. So, They do blaspheme who say Allah is Christ, the Son of Mary. But Christ said, O children of Israel, worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. Whoever joins other gods with Allah, Allah will forbid him the garden, and the fire will be his abode. So whoever joins other gods with Allah, you should understand that that means something very specific. Whoever associates God with the Trinity. Okay? So who does Allah say said this as a warning? Jesus. Okay? So you could believe this, or you could believe that. Go ahead. The grace of the Lord, this is 2 Corinthians, the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Or, they do blaspheme who say Allah is one of three in a Trinity. Look, 572, 573. Okay? You get the feeling that Allah wanted to say that Christians the Christian concept of God is totally false, and that Jesus even said so in divine revelation. Go ahead. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Or, look, 572, 573, skip one, 575. Christ the Son of Mary was no more than a messenger. See how Allah doth make his signs clear to them, yet see in what ways they are deluded away from the truth. Go ahead. So, you get the sense that the revelation of the one exists to deny the other. Go ahead. Can't be an apple and not an apple. So, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Or, and behold, Allah will say, O Jesus, the Son of Mary, did you say unto men, worship me and my mother as gods in derogation of Allah? He will say, glory to thee, I never could say what I had no right to say. So in divine revelation, Allah is querying Jesus to deny what he's saying here, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. Go ahead. Here's the Nicene Creed. We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, one in being with the Father. Or 517. Are you starting to see these verses stack up? In blasphemy indeed are those who say Allah is Christ the Son of Mary. Say, who then hath the least power against Allah, if his will were to destroy Christ the Son of Mary, his mother and all, and everyone on earth? One of the things you should say, O Jesus, Son of Mary, didst thou say unto men, worship me and my mother as gods? They actually don't even have that right, because in some Islamic circles they say the Trinity is Mary, Jesus, and the Father. And there's a very imprecise understanding of that. Go ahead. At what point does the enforcement of one narrative approach a denial of the truth? If you believe that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Go ahead. So, after all, if Matthew, John, Corinthians, and the Nicene Creed are apples, then the Quran is exactly not an apple. Okay? There's no question here. I'm not asking anybody to make a faith choice here. I'm just saying that it is impossible to do interfaith the way these interfaith communities are doing it, unless they want to reduce Matthew, John, and Corinthians to meaninglessness. Okay? Go ahead. So, think about it from the Muslim point of view. If Isa of the Quran correctly defines Jesus, wouldn't Muslims have a right to suppress Christian worship of him? So if I think interfaith is more important than what I believe, meet them halfway, haven't you actually legitimized their view of why they have a right to stamp you up? Not the least of which is, guess what? Guess what they know? I'll tell you this. You can find this out for yourself. They know that those clerics, ministers, priests, and rabbis who engage in this discussion already have questionable beliefs in their own systems. Sure. Because if they actually, remember, real faith is immune to terror.
Yeah, otherwise they wouldn't even talk to them.
They wouldn't talk to them on these terms.
Not this way.
Yeah.
Okay. So they already know that the people they're working with are squishy. You know, that in the DC language, when you talk about a weak-willed politician, they're squish.
Yeah.
You know, like that. Go ahead. So they know what they believe. Keep going. So, from a Christian perspective, doesn't the acceptance of the one entail a denial of the other? Let's go. So, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Keep going. Here, behold, be on them how they are deluded away from the truth. Before you go, I just want to make a point that this is a Muslim published Quran here, and they capitalized the word truth. I believe this verse is a direct poke at John 14:16. Okay?
A poke means to make fun of.
Yeah. Well, a direct, yes. A direct challenge.
Strap at.
Yes. Go ahead. So, Surah 9:30. Now, does anybody here bring a Quran?
Yeah.
Surah 9:29. 9:29. We're good. Surah 9:29 is the command for jihad against people of the book, and it says, "You must fight them until they testify there is no God but God, even if they are people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued." So the very next verse afterwards says, "The Jews call Uzier the son of God." I've talked to a lot of Jews, and they honestly don't know what this is. Okay? The Jews call Uzier the son of God, and the Christians call Christ the son of God. That is a saying from their mouth. In this they but imitate what the unbelievers of old used to say, "All is cursed be on them, how they are deluded away from the truth." So you see, I think this is on purpose. The truth or the truth. Because I think that's purposeful. Like, I know I'm repeating myself. Go ahead. So, keep going. Keep going.
And they curse us for that.
The problem is, I think that there's a generation. I brought this book. I was wondering to bring it up or not. I hunted for this book for a long time. It was written in 1954 by this woman named Bella Dodd. Okay? And this book got buried during the McCarthy period in American history. But Bella Dodd was a member of the Communist Party of the United States. In the 20s, 30s, and 40s, her job was to populate all the seminaries with Marxists. Okay? And to have them lay low for 15, 20 years. They should be everything their faith group wants them to be. Okay? Until they rise up in power. So in some churches become bishops or key aides to bishops or senior rabbis or senior people like some of the larger Presbyterian evangelical churches. She had a radical conversion in the 50s, and so she wrote this book explaining exactly what they were doing. But I, for one, don't think it's an accident. Like, for example, when you go to Vatican II and all these older cardinals sat over Vatican II and didn't understand that people writing the documents wrote them in a way that for them it looked okay, but once they were coming in, they could take a complete left turn. And I do mean left turn. Because, I can't, my kids who went to a Catholic grade school have a hard time telling me what's in a catechism, but they can tell me social justice. Okay. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody know that Said Qutb for the Muslim Brotherhood wrote a book on social justice in 1948?
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend much time here. This is just to show you, okay, objective of jihad from Book of Islamic Law. The Caliph makes war upon Jews and Christians, Zoroastrians, provided he has first invited them to enter Islam. That's the dawah phase. You're invited to come, okay, and practice. And if they will not, then invite them to enter the social order of Islam by paying the non-Muslim poll tax. Okay. Oh, here we have it. And it quotes you where this authority comes from. Verse 9:29. Fight those who do not believe in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold not what Allah and His messengers have forbidden, who do not practice the religion of truth, being those who have been given the book, those are people of the book, until they pay the poll tax out of hand and are humbled. And when you go into tasfirs, they mean humiliated. Okay? The time and place for which is before the final descent of Jesus, upon whom be peace, because Jesus is a prophet. Muslim. After his final coming, because in Islam, Jesus comes at the end of days. Okay? After his final coming, Nothing but Islam will be accepted for them, for taking the poll tax is only effective until Jesus' return, which is the divinely revealed law of Muhammad. The coming of Jesus does not entail a separate divinely revealed law, for he will rule by the law of Muhammad. This does not contradict the final coming of Jesus, since he will not rule according to the evangel, the gospel, but according to what the Prophet Muhammad delivered. So, in Islam, Jesus comes at the end of days to throw all Christians to hell for refusing to convert to Islam. Now, this is actually not far out there in Islam, and you see this theme come up all the time. In fact, Major Hassan, and I might have a slide here, spoke to this issue. Go ahead. In fact, here is Major Hassan's slide. Who here does not know who Major Hassan is? Okay, in 2009, a U.S. Army Major, Hassan, Major Hassan, went onto Fort Hood and started shooting soldiers.
Yes, I know.
Okay. What a lot of people don't know is he created a briefing that he gave over 20 times in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Medical Facility and at the Pentagon. And these are his slides saying what he was going to do if he got sent to the Middle East to fight. So he quotes, the messenger of Allah said, "By the one in whose hand is my soul, soon the son of Mary will descend among you as a just judge. He will break the cross and kill the pigs, Christians and Jews, and abolish the jizya, and money will become abundant until no one will accept it." This is actually set. How many people knew that that was part of Islam? Raise your hand.
Well,
Kill the Jews.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no, that Jesus comes at the end of days.
No.
Okay.
The cross.
Go ahead. So the Isa of Islam that Muslims revere as a prophet and who adore the same one merciful God doesn't return at the end of days for Christians to have their ascent into heaven, but it's to throw them to hell. Okay? Yes, we believe Jesus comes too. We believe the same thing. Go ahead. So, go ahead. So we go to this book, and we're almost done. We'll open up the Q&A here. The Brotherhood relies on Swindler and Richard Landau in BeliefNet. And what am I saying here? Their whole book on interfaith movement is based on how they're going to manipulate the interfaith rules created by the left. Because the interfaith movement is profoundly left-wing.
Yeah.
We've established that, have we not? For the purpose of discussion.
They work together. The leftist with Islam work together.
Absolutely. Dialogue must take place in an atmosphere of mutual trust. So if you're going to have a dialogue, you have to impose trust, but it's not trust earned. So when you go into an environment of trust, the question is, every one of these seem reasonable at one level, but if you actually impose them as rules for people who are supposed to be beholden to a higher standard, if you're a rabbi, canons of Judaism; if you're a priest, Catholic priest, the Catholic Church holds; if you're a Presbyterian, what Presbyterians hold up. You're never allowed to allow these rules to supersede those rules. And of course what you see is they get flipped. Okay, so mutual trust means I can never say something that you would be insulted by.
So you can't say anything.
See how that works?
Yes.
But here, each dialogue partner has the right to define his or her own religion and belief, so the rest can only describe what it looks like to them from the outside. So the Imam gets to tell me what Islam is, and I have to take that as the place where I start from when we have the discussion. Because remember, this is an atmosphere of trust. And to say, Imam, you're full of, well, I'm being recorded, would break that bond of trust. Participants entering into dialogue must be willing to reflect upon themselves and their own religion. You can't challenge them, but they're going to challenge you about your religion. They're going to open the CIC Center and tell you some guy nobody's ever heard of is just as important as Marco Polo. And they're going to have a Vatican flag right next to the Saudi Arabian flag, where it's like crazy.
It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Yes.
Beyond ridiculous. Practice fairness when speaking for or about other faiths, and speak in a way that people of that religion can affirm is accurate. Avoid misusing Scripture. Now, look, now you say, yeah, I mean, if I'm going to meet with a bunch of people, I don't want the rabbi reading something and that evangelical over there reading something, and the Catholic over there, and I don't want this to turn into, if we're going to talk about interfaith issues, which for each of them should be what they can agree on without compromising their own faith. Because you're thinking that when you look at that. But actually, people who have faiths that are tied to a scripture can never actually subordinate that to the interfaith rules without subordinating their faith to a culturally Marxist narrative that is designed to reduce their faith to meaninglessness. So when you see the Bishop of Vienna, what was it he said about a year ago?
Oh my, what did he say? I know what you're referring to, but you're catching me off guard.
He said something outrageous. The Bishop of Vienna.
Schönborn hat irgendwas gesagt.
About what?
Yes, he said something. What was that now? Have to see.
Okay.
Avoid misusing scripture. I already read that one. Sorry. So my point is, if you actually apply these rules as what are supposed to govern your top level thinking, and I'm not talking about the average person. You're talking about people who represent faiths. Okay. Why can't the Christian or the Jew go up to the rabbi or the minister or the priest and say, what the heck are you talking about? You can't avoid using scripture by which is meant no one shall attempt to use one's own religion to dismiss another religion as invalid. There's a certain point where if you are an apple, if you are a Jew, Protestant, or Catholic, you necessarily think those other religions are invalid from a faith point of view. You're only accepting the fact that in a tolerant society before it was redefined, they have a right to believe that.
But no more.
But no more.
Yeah.
You necessarily representing one religion think the others are invalid. Right. Otherwise, you're reducing you're just saying this is just the flavor of the day.
Yeah.
Okay? So what I'm trying to get at here is, I have no problem with religious groups meeting. I think it's a good thing. I have no problem with them meeting to discuss issues that they can agree on as part of a civil society. That's a good thing. But what you see here, and we have it, that the Brotherhood is keying on these rules that come from this organization. Okay?
The guy in Chicago.
And you realize that in the 70s and 80s in most of the seminaries, that they were inferior. I'm just saying. You go to Protestant, those were bad days. You go to Catholics, those were bad days. That these people are hardly literate in their own faith who moved up in the system. So I just like to point out that we need to take a look at that interfaith relationship. Go ahead. So I wrote a thesis. It's now declassified. I'm going to turn it into a book at the National Defense Intelligence College in 2007. When I'm not a major anymore. I was introduced as a major. I was told if I wanted to stay out of jail, I'd better get out. So I did. So from the National Defense Intelligence College, it's an elite master's degree producing school that you have to already be in the system to go there. And when I wrote my thesis in 2007 called To Our Great Detriment, it's the cost of not understanding the enemy has been high, is getting higher every day. Right? It will increasingly be measured by news stories that narrow in on senior leaders' inability to answer basic questions about the nature of the enemy and its environment. Right? It will also manifest itself in official responses to terrorist attacks that become progressively less reality-based. How many people think we're there?
Oh, yeah.
So what most of my work is on the Islamic Jihad and the organizations and the OIC. But one of the things I think is really important, go ahead, let me see what we have here. Political correctness can only be a cause for losing a war. It could be a strategy to defeat the United States. A strategy to actually defeat the United States could be premised on it succeeding. And for the purpose of this, every bit is true here as anywhere else. Go ahead. Let's make sure. Okay. So I didn't have a couple quotes in there. I think it was just an accident. I took them out on the explanatory memorandum. Remember, I showed you that Brotherhood document. They say their mission is to destroy by getting other groups to work with them and to subvert their own system for them.
Yeah.
So, you did not have an imam come out and say something when the Bishop of Austria came out and said something. You had the Bishop of Austria come out and say it. In fact, we have, in a bigger one, I have the Austrians say a lot of weird things. The bishops of Austria say a lot of weird things, actually tracking on what they're saying, because when somebody who is Catholic in Austria says something that's not good, the imam's not going to attack them. The bishop is. And we have a record of that. Not just here, but the rabbis attack other rabbis in the United States for speaking up on this. I think that's really interesting, because to get this wrong in the Jewish sense, this has an existential consequence because of what's going on in Israel. So it's pretty much across the board, and it's pretty much transnational. I can open up to questions, and I did want to answer your question.
Steve?
Yes.
I think we should take a brief
Should we take a little break?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
It's a little...
What they understand is that you could paralyze Western thinking with the word dialogue. And then what happens when you bring, whether it's a religious organization or a political or a media organization, dialogue is a Linskiest term. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is, you have people who generically use the word dialogue, and you have to make sure you're not, bringing fire in on them. But when you're here like at the OSCE or with the Pope, they talk about dialogue, you need to understand that as a Linskiest, reduced to meaningless process, where it's about getting someone engaged in a process, and then you get bogged down in the process. Some people will use the word analysis paralysis, where the engines of government, the institutions become seized up, paralyzed. And that is not a side effect of the dialogue, it is the intent of the dialogue. And so my thing is, when you're in a decision-making rule, you're not allowed to dialogue. But my thing is, I know that the NDU, National Defense University, which is the top-level national defense school in the United States, the best and the brightest in the U.S. military and the State Department and the other agencies. If you get to go to the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., there's the Army War College, there's the Navy War College, there's the Air Force War College, there's other, but NDU is the crown jewel. And there, for Islam, they require people to read Karen Armstrong.
Okay.
And my take on it is, this is just babble. This is something for a high school child to read. And I say, my problem isn't just that you have her reading Karen Armstrong, that you're professional military officers at the colonel level, and you accept this as reading material at that level. But the point of it with your wife is that and this is, I think, the thing, this is an issue of fact that can be determined by going to the sources. You're basing your definition of jihad on what you're told, or what Karen Armstrong wants you to think. Well, guess what? Just like there's such a thing as a war on poverty and a war on drugs, there is such a thing as the jihad for the inner self. However, it has no doctrinal status. In Islamic law and in the Quran, jihad means to wage war against non-Muslims. And that's a fact. And if she disagrees, she's wrong. But you don't just have to say that. You can tell her the rule. And here is the rule. If you want to know what Islam stands for, there'll be a mosque. And in the first strip mall in America, they have strip malls. The first strip mall from the mosque, there'll be a little Islamic halal meat shop that will also sell books. And as the mosque builds, they'll separate out over time. So what happens is, there's a rule. The first 5 bookshelves are for non-Muslims who wander in and want to know something about Islam, and they give them exactly what they want to hear. Let's just say there's 100 bookshelves in the halal shop. The back 50 are either in Arabic for the serious Muslim scholar, or they're in Urdu or Pashtun or whatever the local population reflects. But that means 45 of the bookshelves have books on Islam written for English-speaking Muslims, or here it would be Austrian-speaking Muslims, for them to read that are not for you to read. Remember, you have the first 5. Here comes some squishy person who wants to all get along. Here's the book we want you to read. Okay. What you do, and tell your wife to do this, is you get a book that's written by a Muslim who's recognized in the Islamic community as an authority on the subject, who is writing to a Muslim audience. That, you have to do all 3. Because I used to have a part of my briefing where I would show, here's Nuha Mim Keller. Here's what he wrote for you. Here's what he wrote for them. And I ask, is he lying? Everybody raises their hand. I said, he's not lying. This is what you are supposed to think. This is what you are required to know. And so it has to be written for a Muslim audience. And then say, please show me where you find this greater jihad. Please show me. Because I'm going to show you the 50 books we just bought, and 80 times they talk about jihad, because they'll talk about it twice. Oh, here's a school book for a 7th grader. See, they're teaching jihad. Here is a book of, here's the Tafsir. God, they're talking jihad. Now, what will happen is, for people who bought this book, I cite these things just so they're there, so you can go back to it. A lot of these things are online, so you can go and look up a Tafsir. They have English language on them. You can go to, in America, I go to USC, University of California, Quran, and the Brotherhood has all the Tafsirs, all the Qurans, and they have different translations, so that you can pick which translation you think is the best for you. And the thing is,
What does tasfir mean?
Tafsir, T-A-F-S-I-R. Because the Quran is considered the uncreated word of God, unlike in the West, okay, they mean, and the Quran is the pinnacle of all law, okay? Every verse has been doctrinally defined. You don't have a range of interpretation as is commonly understood in the West. A tafsir, T-A-F-S-I-R, are official commentaries on the Quran verses. And they're, I have an English language translation of Tafsir Ibn Kathir. It's considered the best. It's 10 volumes set this big. I also have one that's this big, which is like a desktop version. If you look up the verse, you see what it says. Guess what? There's a 99% chance, 200% of the time, that that's what it means at all times. Well, taqiyya isn't lying to advance yourself. Taqiyya is lying to protect yourself. And I make this point because I think that the word taqiyya gets overused. Taqiyya is a defensive term because there is Quranic support for the larger idea that because you are in a state of perpetual war, being the Dar al-Islam, you are always allowed to deceive. And so if I had the book of Islamic law here, if everyone wants me to prove this, I can do this. I don't have to prove that Muslims believe this. I could just prove that here's a book of Islamic law that says it, and the people you're working against, if they're the Brotherhood or the OIC, they believe it. I don't have to comment on what every Muslim believes. And there it is. You are obligated to lie if it advances the cause of Islam. Is America at risk from an invasion or like an insurgency inside? The answer would be no. I think that if I could create a distinguishing characteristic, in Europe, you had Muslims emigrate over a period of years. And starting in the 90s, if you want to say, you could pick the year, you started to see with the younger generation, they started to become radicalized. Okay, so you had and the people who were emigrating before that point were basically coming over to get a job. Things were bad. They were not, in the sense that we're talking about, politicized. Okay, and in that sense, the Muslim population is much bigger in Europe than it is in the United States. No question about it. But what is different is, remember I showed you ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, and then NATE? What has happened, and they have the chicks, is they come into certain places and they build these mosques that are massively out of scale to the populations they would be building them. Like, you're building a 5,000-man mosque for 30 Muslims. And the investment is coming from abroad. That's one thing. So you say, and all of a sudden you see this mass migration where, in the places where they're coming into the country, they concentrate in certain places. So
Minnesota
is one of them.
Could I help this gentleman?
But let me finish first. Let me finish. 'Cause I want to. So that all raises questions, but I think the main thing is the difference in immigration to Europe as opposed to America is it seems that the immigrants coming over to America are much more coming over on a mission, not as immigrants. Now, that's not all Muslims. It might not be all, it's not all Muslims, it might not even be a majority. But you clearly see there's a leadership class coming over with a mission. And so that they're smaller in numbers, but there's more coherence. And if you were to go to America and bump into a cab driver, well, this guy's not one of these people. I said, that's fine, I get that. The issue is their success at penetrating the media and penetrating the political elites. So they're adopting these languages in this narrative that you see at the OSCE, so that despite the fact that their numbers don't reflect it, you see the same thing going on there that you see going on here. So it's their influence out of proportion to their numbers over there. But they clearly have, if you take a look at, I'm one of those people, and I argue it, that the countering violent extremism narrative is a narrative, and it's hostile. And it's hostile to Westerners, it's hostile to the United States, because we have laws on countering terrorism. And when our FBI is doing CVE, which was everything they talked about at the OSCE,
Well, what does that mean?
countering violent extremism. If you go on Google and start looking for classes on the CVE, you'll find half the classes are in the Middle East. You'll find half the people teaching it here are from the Middle East. The CVE is to talk about things in a way that don't raise the central issue. And it's funny that no matter how much, like in America, if you read an article in Time magazine about violent extremism, it might start with a picture of bin Laden, but it always ends with someone who talks about the Constitution. You see, here's the underlying, this is where the left and the Islam come together. When I say Islam, I mean like the Brotherhood. Here's where they come together. They both want to destroy the concept of nation, nationality. They both want to destroy concepts of identity. They both want to destroy the old order. There's perfect correlation there. And so what is violent extremism? Violent extremism is if you believe in something enough that you'll stand up for it, that makes you extreme. Because there's nothing worth standing up for. In the postmodern narrative, because there are no facts, there is no truth. Now, other people say because there is no truth, there are no facts. Okay. Therefore, if you believe in something enough to stand up for it, what you believe religiously, what you believe for your country as a nationality, you're a racist and you're an extremist. Okay? If you're willing to say, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and you actually go fight a war and come back, well, you're a violent extremist. I use this analogy because I'm sure nobody's aware of it. DHS was classifying as examples of violent extremism returning veterans for no other reason that they were returning veterans, because they believed in something enough to take an oath to it and then defend it. So I will argue that when you hear your people talking, whoever you are, violent extremism, it's a narrative that we have records from the Department of Homeland Security of the United States that the people who sat in the meetings to set it up were the Muslim Brotherhood. They were there. Imam Majid, all the people. And it's in my book.
It's an invasion. It's an invasion.
But the point is, that, how do you call an invasion when they're invited in? But the point is, so when you understand that the Brotherhood, we had to get, there's something called Freedom of Information Act in America where you can force the government to disclose documents. And so we got the documents to prove that the people who helped set up the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security's violent extremism protocols, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, by name. So that's where I think there's a disparity. Sir. I think that that's a whole book. But I think that the thing to do is to set up, there is a Muslim Brotherhood. They have clear command and control. They're not fractured, except for the fact that they operate in one country at one level, and they have a mechanism by which if you get your arms around it, get your mind around it, you can understand it. And they have certain levels of command and control, so they operate at certain stages in certain places. They are separate from Saudi Arabia. The distinguishing factor between Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Sunni world is Saudi Arabia, and you can throw into that Kuwait, Qatar, and I think UAE. Well, partly maybe, is that they're Wahhabists.
Oh, yeah.
The thing of it is, the Saudis in the Arab world have always been kind of the backwater people. If you take a map of the Ottoman Empire, they have all these crooked lines for all the vilayets, but they always have a straight line cutting off the Najd Desert, because that's where those crazy Arabs from the desert were. And they're crazy. We can't deal with them. And this would be where the House of Saud formed. And the reason I'm saying this is because when they found oil, it's like the Beverly Hillbillies running the show. Up from the ground came some bubbling crude. And so they've been able to call the shots. In truth, Sunnis believe generally that Wahhabism is a heretical belief that has been contained inside the Najd Desert and the Persian Gulf, precisely because only these crazy people believed it, that nobody wanted to go there anyway. But here's the thing. The Saudi royal family is so big, it would be like one of these old dynasties from the medieval period. If a revolution was going to come, you would have your family on one side. In Saudi Arabia, you have a third of your family on one side, a third of your family on this group, and a third of your family in this group. So no matter who wins, the House of Saud goes on. But what people don't realize about the House of Saud is the paternal name of the House of Saud comes from Abdul Aziz. It's called the House of Saud. But the maternal name of the House of Saud is the House of Wahhab. And that Wahhab went around the Najd Desert and he bumped into this warlord named Abdul Aziz and it said, you know how you guys are all raiding? I'm being fast and loose here. Okay, if someone wants to quote me in a story, I can do the 1 hour discussion, I can cut to the quick here. Okay, Abdul Aziz said, if you understand my understanding of Islam, okay, then you should understand that when you invade that tribe, you just take a couple cattle and you could take the whole tribe and you could make them come over to your side. And he said, well, we'll do that. And so Wahhab became the imam for Abdul Aziz, and they went raiding and created this big army. It was so bad that when they went into Najaf, they killed every Shiite in there. To this day, the Shiite war cry, jihad cry, is about Najaf. Okay, so they're killing people left and right. And so the Ottoman Caliph comes up and forms an army formed by Muhammad Ali. He goes down to Egypt to form an army. It takes him 10 years to catch him. They catch him. They give him an un-Islamic execution. Why am I saying this? The maternal name. Wahhab said, this is a great thing. Why don't you have your son marry my daughter? And that's the formation of the House of Saud. So people say, well, the Saudi royal family has to give up Wahhabism. It's literally in the genetic code of that family. Okay? So they can never undo it. So getting to your question and answer, you have to always understand that there's that line that always separates groups like the Brotherhood, which are not Wahhabi, but they are Salafi. Okay? Wahhabism comes within the smallest of the four doctrinal schools is the Hanbali school of Islamic law. And inside the Hanbali school of Islamic law, you had a man in the, I think, 11th or 12th century named Ibn Taymiyyah. And this man, Ibn Taymiyyah, lived at a time where they were fighting the Mongols. And some of the Mongols converted to Islam, but it's because they were, I can't remember what the word is, where they just adopted any religion and they never really believed in anything. So here they saw these Mongols converting to Islam and disobeying every rule. So Ibn Taymiyyah starts becoming a jihadi, fighting these people because they're apostates. Well, up until this point, you couldn't put another Muslim to death for apostasy, so he created this concept called takfirism. Have you ever heard this phrase before? Takfirism is a concept in Taymiyyah Islamic law that only exists in the Hanbali school that says that when you have non-performing Muslims, and they have strict criteria. I don't want to make it out like this. They have their strict criteria by which to make this judgment. When they violate certain canons of Islam, you could treat them like infidels for the purpose of fighting them because they become takfir. A couple centuries later, I think about 300 years later, in 1750, you have Wahhab, and he has his actual theology is kind of boring. If you see Wahhabis fighting with other Sunnis, it's about whether they should have gravestones. And so, when I used to work in the job I had that I will not mention, I would say, listen, when you're in Iraq and you hear them fighting about whether they should get rid of the gravestones and they rename a mosque, Ibn Taymiyyah Mosque, that's an Al-Qaeda. They're setting up shop there. Well, we can't call them that because that's what the Iraqis call foreigners. Well, they're called foreigners because they're from Saudi Arabia. And they're also called foreigners because they have a foreign concept of Islam. Oh, you can't make those statements. I kind of did. But anyhow, so what you have is a situation where you have Wahhab come, and he puts his Wahhabist views nested in Taymiyan Islamic law, which has takfir, which is in the Hanbali school. 80% of the Sunni Muslim world has never been Hanbali. And 50% of the Hanbali school was never Taymiyan. But when you have the House of Saud, the house in Kuwait, they're Wahhabis. This dramatically separates them from the rest of the Sunni world, and especially the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood operates primarily out of Egypt. The Saudis have historically funded them a lot, although not recently. Why? Because it tends to be that when the Saudis got oil, most of the people in the Saudi desert were illiterate. They didn't know how to run their systems. So they brought in Egyptians. They brought in Palestinians to help run their school. So, of course, you have the brother of Sayyid Qutb, Muhammad Qutb. He's at Jeddah. He teaches there. What happens is you see that relationship started getting difficult over the last number of years. Mainly because what? The Saudis can run these systems by themselves. They see these people as foreigners and they push them out. But the go back and forth of the Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda is because on certain levels their doctrines are the same. On other levels their doctrines really conflict because it's Wahhabism. And Wahhabism has a limited pool of people they can recruit from, and they're Wahhabis. And that's a finite population. So I think when you can develop the things that draw the central lines over which they orient around, you can actually play that game. We were basically saying, I have to figure out how to say this. Last year, how many times? Is it the first 400 times that you got fooled by this? Where a group decides to break off from al-Nusra or ISIS because they want to be moderate. You decide to train them and give them equipment because now they're moderate. And all of a sudden they quit. And how could it happen? They all quit that group and went back to ISIS. You say, is it the 50th time this happened that you were surprised? Again? And it's like, so the question becomes, I think you hit it right. They are able to form relationships and alliances and flip in a way that I think is completely coherent for them. I don't think that they're in a situation, but when I say it's coherent for them, I fully acknowledge I can track them flipping, I can predict them flipping. I don't ever quite get that they flip like this, because from a Western point of view, if I'm an ally of you, I'm stabbing you in the back. And it just seems that they flow in a different way. Has anybody here been to Cairo?
No.
Okay. You as a Westerner could never survive driving on those roads. The way they drive, it's total chaos. But they never get in an accident. They don't.
How do they do it?
Well, the question is, that's an interesting question, but my point is, you have to get over the fact that you may never understand that they flow away, that you can measure that they flip, but you might not ever understand why. That's why it's a different culture. By the way, I'm not making a judgment on that. I remember when I was last in Cairo, watching the traffic go by, and if this were here, there'd be 10 accidents in 5 minutes. And they don't even touch each other. How does that happen? 3 lanes in the road, 10 cars in the road. Always, right? All right. So I don't know. Did I answer your question? Okay. I think there are all sorts of groups in the Islamic world. Some Muslim Brotherhood, some not, and they go back and forth. A book that was popular a couple of years ago was The Starfish and the Spider and the Starfish. And the point of the book on the spider and the starfish is the Western understanding. You have the head departments. You have bureaus, you have things, and everything works on a line and block chart, okay? And so you would say if the head of the Brotherhood is here, he must have this person here, and they have that person there.
This is not the case in the Arab world.
It's not the case here. We are spiders. They're starfish. Each element does its thing and has its mission, but if you cut one of the pieces of the starfish off, it'll go and become a starfish. And it's the world's most perfect distributed information culture. So that what you have in Islam is you have Islam, which if everybody stopped believing, once someone starts reading Islamic law as it's actually designed, it can rebuild itself. It just can restructure itself. I'm a science fiction fan, even bad science fiction. So I used to watch a TV show called Stargate. Did anybody ever watch that show?
No.
Well, I can't use the metaphor. But they had these transformers. And no matter how you could break them down, if you energize them, they could reform into what they are. And people, Muslims may be completely imperfect, and any group of them may have an imperfect understanding of Islam. But Islamic law is crystal clear, so much so that if you knock down and if you destroy it, they work so hard to keep you from reading Islamic law and tell you there are many interpretations. And on one level, that's not untrue. But on another level, it's absolutely clear. And so I'm saying it's because the Brotherhood has an absolutely clear command and control, and they have total authority where they act. Now, there may be groups out there that affiliate and are a part, but I will say in the U.S., they're operating much of the music, but you have to know what the central core is. And it's not a person, even though I will tell you Kawadari is the leader today. If you killed him, there are any number of people who could replace him and never miss a beat.
May I say, it's interesting what the gentleman said, but in the end, they do work together for a common goal, and that is to conquer us. I am convinced.
But I think he's also true. The minute we're gone, you're going to have them fight with the left. But before you have that, you'll have the Wahhabis fight with the Brotherhood. And the Brotherhood represents, close to 1 billion Muslims, and Wahhabis represent close to 100 million. We know who's going to win that.